It's SongTalk Radio with Michael, Neil, Phil, and the gang.
Welcome to SongTalk Radio. This is the show with songwriters talking to other songwriters about the craft of songwriting. We share tips, tools, and techniques, and all together we come better at writing songs. I'm your host, Neil Modi, and with me are the programmed members of the SongTalk Radio Action Team. We have Floating Point Phil.
I am well programmed and written mostly in C++.
Oh, very good.
For those of you scoring at home.
Yeah, it's a lot of vitamin C. And we have Machine Learning Mike.
That's the best kind of learning. Good evening, fellow humans.
Come to the machine.
Relinquish your wills.
And for all the rest of you out there, please send your comments and questions to @SongTalkRadio on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or feedback@songtalk.ca, and we'll share your thoughts and feelings on the show. And please visit us at songtalk.ca to find out how you can be a guest. And before we get to tonight's guest, a little bit of housekeeping. Of course, we are now 1 week away, guys, from our songwriting challenge. Is that right?
Yeah.
That is correct.
And in case you don't know about it yet, we are challenging ourselves and our listeners to write a song where the chord progression never changes. And the three of us are going to share our answers to the challenge on next week's episode on January 26th. And replies from our listeners, of which we've already received several replies, will be shared on the February 16th episode. So if you're interested in participating, and you should be, write up a fresh new song, send us your answer, send us an MP3 and your lyric sheet to feedback@songtalk.ca by February 9th, and we'll feature your song on either the February 16th episode or a future episode if we need to allot some more time to that.
And how is it going, fellas?
I'm done.
Oh, you're done? Nice.
I finished mine. I finished my recording last week. I'm like shoving it away. I think I'm finished.
Nice.
Until after the show, I may make revisions based on what you guys say. It's not been released yet.
Exactly.
But,
It's always a living, breathing thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
How about you guys? Bill?
Well, I was hoping to do more last weekend, but instead we decided to finally take down the tree and put away all the Christmas decorations, and that took up much more time than I anticipated. So, so the next definitely this weekend we'll be busy finishing off the track, and probably some maybe even a day during the week. I might even take a day off of work. So my boss is going to be ticked off, I'll tell you that
I'll
much.
leave it when I see it, man.
Really.
How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I'm happy with the shape of the song, and I'm just now looking to get it recorded proper. So, but yeah, like Phil, I'm going, I don't know when I've got the time to do that. So hopefully, I won't take a day off work because I'm a good employee, but I guess it'll be an evening then.
Well, and of course, Michael, you've sent the track to me and Neil, and we're going to add some stuff to it.
Yeah, I'm quite excited to hear that. Neil's already been working on some drums, some drum tracks for it, so that'll be exciting. I was like the collaboration experience.
Yeah, it should be good fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's always fun to work on someone else's song because it's like no musical decisions, no songwriting decisions. Just have fun with it.
Yeah,
Exactly. I'll bear the responsibility. You guys just have fun.
Yes.
yeah.
The song sucks. It ain't my fault. The drums were great.
The song sucks, but man, is it in time? Boy, does it
Great,
groove.
Mike. I really like that.
I think the key for me is going to be not to tense up and sort of like kind of panic. I need to kind of relax into it and just sort of let stuff flow.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it might be an interesting song this time. So it should be good.
I'm quite liking mine, and mine wasn't a production craziness because it's just piano and vocal, so it's very ambient with lots of reverb. That's about it.
Oh, very cool. I don't think I've ever heard you do any of that type of thing. So
I've done it a couple times, but yeah, not very often for sure.
No.
Very often. Yeah, usually I'm down with the electro pop thing, so it's a switch for me. But the song wanted that, you know what I mean?
Yes. And of course, some big news.
Yes, the passing of Phil Spector. So
Yeah, it's huge. He was such a huge force in production. I mean, he really became sort of like a producer that everybody knew, and it was a Phil Spector record versus an artist record, and most people don't know who produces what, frankly. And I think he was the first time. I think the average person sort of had some idea of who this person was.
yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, because he's up there with like George Martin in terms of knowability, probably as the producer guy, and maybe Butch Vig. But,
Yeah, he was, Phil Spector was quite assertive in getting his name out there in a way that George Martin wasn't. What I didn't realize was that he was a session guitar player in the beginning. And went to school or had some early association with Lieber and Stoller. And they helped him out with his career in the early days.
It was interesting. I know one of the big stories is that because he did the Beatles' White Album, is it? He did.
No.
He did.
Get Back or one of them.
Or Hey Jude.
Yeah, where he took it and he put a ton of strings on after. the
Yeah,
fact.
and they
That-
were
that-
never very happy
was
with
it
it.
Long and Winding Road, maybe?
Yes, definitely that.
Yeah.
All those strings, they're a little overdone for what they intended, I think.
Yeah, that's always true.
The thing that I read today that surprised me was that the Tina Turner song that he did, the Mountain High, what was it?
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, that was a commercial failure
Yeah.
at the time.
Wow.
Such a great track, and I was like, I didn't know that it flopped when it came out.
I guess it's timing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, it's sad. He was certainly a force in the music industry, and certainly had some troubles. I think maybe with some mental health issues, and of course wound up in prison.
Yes.
But yeah, another one of the major stars who's passed away.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see who the major stars will be from these years. Who's going to stand the test of time, because
Yeah.
a lot of very big artists who we don't really recognize anymore.
Like modern contemporary artists.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's like people who are very popular in their time,
Yeah.
but now most people just don't have they didn't stand the test of time.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, there's always going to be that happening.
And I think there are so many people out there right now making music, like tons of music come out all the time. It's much harder to stand out.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
In the early days, there were fewer outlets for music and there were fewer people making music, so it might be easier to recognize names. But now when there's 25,000 songs released every month.
And everyone has a recording studio in their laptop.
Yeah, exactly.
In their pocket. Oh boy. Okay, so our guest tonight is Jay Gordon Wright, multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, and performer. And we're going to start the show. We're going to hear a little bit of his song, Take Your Time.
Take your time. Take your time. Baby, you don't have to hurry. Come on and take your time. Born on Monday, met you on Tuesday, in love by Tuesday afternoon. And I don't
Terrific.
Jay Gordon Wright
Very
is
cool.
a multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, and performer who has entertained audiences around the world. He is classically trained on violin and expanded his musical toolshed to include just about every instrument he can get his hands on. Writing songs at the piano or with the guitar, his trademark style often includes dense vocal arrangements, vintage textures, and earworm melodies. Jay Gordon has had the thrill of performing alongside Canadian luminaries such as Ian Thomas, Bill Dillon, Mike Boguski of Blue Rodeo, and Steve Strongman, Steve Strongman was a guest on our show a while back. And he has appeared with the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra on From the Beatles with Love, and is well known as a student and practitioner of the Beatles craft. Blending his influences with a strong musical instinct, Jay Gordon Wright has developed a sound that is at once vintage and modern. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Thank you so much, Neil and Michael and Phil. Thanks so much for having me.
Great to have you. So I want to open with a question. How do you write a Beatles song without ripping off the Beatles?
Well, it comes down to a few things. I mean, it's a combination of songwriting and production, really, and how you go into it. And listening to you guys off the top and talking about a recording studio in your pocket and that sort of thing. I think the further you go down that road, the harder it is to get back to sounding like the Beatles. It's kind of a reliance on analog and natural and being in the room. But I mean, at the end of the day, I really believe the only way to sound like the Beatles is to just live in their world for a little bit, and kind of immerse yourself. And I guess at a certain point, just kind of by osmosis, take it on.
Like, does it take like a real deep study of classic Beatles songs, or?
I don't know. I can only speak to what I've done, which was really a deep study. And when you do that, I mean, one of the things that's so interesting about the Beatles catalog is you can kind of start at the beginning and do the journey with them through to the end. And I don't know many other artists where that's true. There's so much pressure, especially these days, to kind of hit the ground running with a first song that's as polished as anything else that's out there on the market. Whereas with the Beatles, I mean, to start at Love Me Do, it's almost laughably facile, and yet still catchy and heartwarming. And then by the time you end up at the end, you've taken the whole gamut and you've seen pretty much everything there is to see.
Of course, the main thing is that, not only did the culture, but the technology kind of grew up along with them. So, you're really hearing, with Love Me Do, very, very old approaches to recording, recording studios where your engineer wore a shirt and tie because he was a professional. And, to the last album, which it was all, smoking up in the room and being a musician, So it's interesting to see how the whole sort of concept changed.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that has to do with authority as well. I mean, when they started, they were not in a position to do what they wanted to do in the studio. And that's why you get kind of that constrained sound in a lot of respects. In some ways it's disingenuous to say that the technology grew up with them, because they kind of made the technology grow up. They were in a position uniquely, I think, to be able to say, I want it to sound like I'm swinging around the room on a chandelier.
Yeah.
And then someone has to figure out how to do that. And that took some working and some figuring. But I mean, even I'm less of an expert on Billie Eilish, but there was one of her songs recently that had an effect of sounding like coming through a fan. And they wanted it to sound like cigarette smoke. And that stood out to me. It just seemed like such a Beatles thing to do, and it struck home that it's kind of been a while since we've seen that sort of innovation as well.
That's true. She's very producing based. Sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, from a songwriting perspective, like, what is it about the Beatles songs to you that really stands out and says to you, hey, I want to do something like this? And then more specifically, like, what are the actual things that you pull out of their songwriting?
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, because we're talking about the song "Take Your Time," which not musically in terms of the notes, but takes a lot of cues from "She Loves You," starting with kind of a cold open chorus, We're mentioning instead of a verse chorus, we're doing a chorus verse, and even then realized that it's chorus verse verse, just like She Loves You as well. So, I mean, one of the things that they did really well is if they did have a formula, they probably had about 5 or 6 formulas that they could go to. And that's something that I've always looked to, is song inspiration can come from different places. And one of the places it comes from for me certainly is to be able to say, I'd love to write a song that just comes in right on the chorus. And Take Your Time comes out of that desire. And of course, it's more complicated than that. There's a lot of different inspirations and influences, but they had, such a focus on form in their writing that it's something that you can actually dig into and express yourself through that form.
Now, do you have a certain era of the Beatles that is your favorite?
It's so hard to tell because they do so many different things well in each of the eras. I love the energy of the early eras, and to a certain extent, and I mean, you always have to be careful when talking about the Beatles because anything you say can and will be used against you. But to a certain extent, the early Beatles, there's so much melody in there. And the focus really was on the melody. Later on, they can get into playing with texture and form, that sort of thing. But I mean, the melody was front and center in the early Beatles, and I think that appeals to my sensibilities.
For me, it's definitely Up to Rubber Soul. And then after that, I mean, I respect what they do, but it doesn't, like, I love the early stuff because it's almost like listening to Bach, where
Yes.
it's like it's basically a template where everything else was sort of built upon. And I think actually, if any songwriter, if you go through the early Beatles and just pull them apart, figure out what notes they start on, see how the notes go through the chords, you will learn so much about how to build hooks, how to build great forms, and how to build great melodies. And you will sometimes, the songs lose a bit of polish because of that. They kind of get into a different part of your brain, but you will learn so much about songwriting.
It's absolutely true. And one of the things that I think they did better than anyone in the history of songwriting is they were so ready to throw everything they had at the page. I remember listening to Hard Day's Night, and at one point it hit me. I mean, the outro that George plays on the 12 string, for any other band of that era, that was a song. They just threw away a song on an outro that fades out and nothing happens with it. But that was the extent of their prolific songwriting, that they weren't afraid to just say, like, I've got this fantastic hook. Hey, let's stick it on the end of something that has nothing to do with it and fade out from it. It's almost arrogant in some ways.
They had so much to use that they didn't have to be precious with it.
Just burning dollar bills at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious how, when you can learn so much from the Beatles, how do you get your own voice using their structure or their song or their sounds, or using them as inspiration? But how do you still stay true to yourself and what you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people who have heard my music that say I'm a terrible person to ask about that. I don't know. I mean, listen, it's got to be different for every person, and I think songwriting as a mechanism for finding your voice, even the function that it serves can be unique. That can be your voice. When you say voice, a lot of times it means just your physical voice that's on the record. And then it can also mean your songwriting, the way you write songs. And it can also mean what you have to say, and it can also mean how you say it. And I mean, even just with those 4 definitions, I really truly feel you can be fairly derivative in 3 of them and still have something valid to offer. I think sometimes it's like a Trojan horse almost. It's like, I'm going to use this to get in because you know it and you love it. But then there's other things to say. And that's kind of been my philosophy. And so I think you can stay true to your own voice just by realizing what it is that you want to be true about your voice and what you're willing to give up as well.
Do you have you played these pieces live, like in bars and that kind of thing?
Not recently.
No,
but,
of course not.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I've a lot of my performing has been in the tribute world, and it's so much easier to get a positive response doing that sometimes than, you know, I've always remarked on the fact that it's just a part of what our society is, that if you stand in the corner with an acoustic and play original songs in a bar, it's fine. Everyone's fine with that. No one's going to get too upset. But if you start playing I Want to Hold Your Hand, now you've got people's attention. So, I mean, most of the time when I've gotten up in front of people, it is other people's songs that I'm playing. But definitely, yeah, I've played these songs.
Because I think most people don't realize that, you know, the Beatles in the very early days were actually very, very raucous. I mean, they weren't quite as smooth and as, you know, polished as they were in the recording studios. There, you know, as an early band, they were all teddy boys and dressed in leather. And of course, the great irony is that, you know, the Rolling Stones were supposed to be the bad boys of rock and roll, and they're all sort of like middle class kids who went to like art school and stuff. You know, like the Beatles were the ones you didn't really want to meet in a dark alley because
Yeah.
they could be kind of nasty. Well, especially John too.
Yeah.
You know, in his early days.
Okay, and especially when when you talk about that early mid Beatles stuff, and you say that they had a few different formulas that they went to. I think that's really kind of inspiring because, you know, you look at the structures of some of those songs, and you know, you think it's a bridge, but then it happens again in the song, and is that a chorus or a post-chorus, or was that, why did it start with the chorus? And like all these things that they played around with structure, but the important thing is that each section is given its due attention, and it's hooky, and it's compelling, and it doesn't matter that it's not, you know, a conventional verse chorus structure. And I really hear that in your song "Take Your Time" as well. You're playing around with that idea that this part of the song is the most important part of the song right now. And
Right. Yeah.
who cares if you're not necessarily leading, you're not necessarily anticipating the next part or whatever, but it's that attention to detail that really stands out.
Yeah, and I mean they also had a way with that as well, and transitions from one section to another.
Yes.
It wouldn't just be hard stop, hard left turn. Now we're going to the chorus. And McCartney really carried this on. I think he drove a lot of that. He was most concerned with kind of that, the transitions. And I remember he came out with a song in 2013, I think, the album New. And the title track is, I really think you could study that for weeks. Because it's so seamless, and it's a lovely ride. You never feel like, okay, now we're leaving the verse going into the chorus. It's just you're there before you realize it. It's amazing.
Yeah, he's great. Even his new album is really interesting to listen to.
Yes.
I have a question for you about "Take Your Time." Where did it come from? What was the process of you creating it?
I think, if I'm honest, the very beginning of it really was wanting to write something chorus first. I hadn't done that before, and I wanted to try that on for size. And I guess that, you know, maybe there's a lesson there that it's one of those story starter ideas. It's just to get out of your comfort zone and do something different. You know, John Lennon, I remember when he was, do you guys know the song "How Do You Sleep"?
Yeah.
One that came out. So I remember him being interviewed on that one. And you got to understand, I heard this when I was 17, something like that. And he said, you know, you can start writing the song and singing the song to someone else. And it wasn't until years later that I realized I was singing it to myself as well. And, you know, as a 17-year-old, I was hearing that, like, but how could you be confused as to who you were singing to? And then you hit a point and you realize, no, it's true. And so, you know, "Take Your Time" is one that, man, there were a few influences on that one. There were probably about 4 or 5 people at different points or overall that I was singing to But then at the end of the day, I'm singing to myself, really. You can get too worked up. You can force things too hard, you know. Sometimes it feels like the more you want something, the less likely you are to get it. And you just have to kind of, you know, take the foot off the gas pedal and not care quite as much. And so that was kind of, I think, the ultimate tree that grew from the seed, is just this idea that, you know, take your time. And even though the song is urgent in some spots, it is kind of that, you know, hurry up and take your time kind of mentality.
Are you working with? Do you start off with with the music, like guitar chords, and then you build a melody on top of that, or do you start with your melody or your lyrics, or?
Yeah, I mean that one in particular, I generally start with music first, is how it comes, and so that one in particular, I think I had the first line and the walk down that came in the chorus. That was the first thing that came, and then it was kind of hitting the chords and hitting the rhythm there to, you know, hit the climb. So yeah, it generally is music first, and then I must confess, I usually kind of weasel the words in around where they can fit.
Good. That's what you're supposed to do it.
I think so. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Well, whatever. I mean, the important thing is to recognize what works best for you or works well for you, and like you say, sometimes it flips the other way, and whatever. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the important thing too, from a songwriting point of view, is you try one method and you get stuck, then you can flip to the other method and see if you can keep on pushing, right?
Yeah, and Neil, I mean, you said about the Beatles songs, with some of the songs, it's like, well, where am I now? This is the most important part of the song. And I think that's about songwriting too, is you can tell yourself the same story about yourself as a songwriter and kind of sometimes get too wrapped up in that. Maybe Tuesday, you're a words first kind of songwriter, and Wednesday, you've got a melody. And one thing that I always like to do is check, do they work together? Because sometimes you can do that and just kind of marry them without their permission. But no, if the music is coming, then figure out what you want to say. And often, I will say, one of the things that I do is when you're singing a line, sometimes just the right word pops into your head. Sometimes you sing a line and this is actually true with Take Your Time, I think, is I heard that first line and there was nothing I could sing but Take Your Time. And so from there, you kind of meditate on what can come from that. What could I be singing about if the chorus is Take Your Time? How did I get to this place? This is not my beautiful car. And go from there.
Yeah, and that's really where your own voice comes into it. Because if you were to hand that title or that line to songwriters, you end up with 10 completely different songs.
So true. I heard off the top the competition with the chords staying the same, and you could probably do the same thing with a phrase or a title.
That's true.
And just say, you know, winter is cold. Write a song called Winter is Cold.
That'll be the next challenge. But, you know, I think we should hear the song.
Yeah, that's
Let's take a listen to the whole thing. Is there anything in particular in this song that you want us to listen for?
The C sharps. Take note of how many C sharps there are. No, I mean...
There'll be a quiz.
Count them all.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, here we go.
Take your time. Take your time. Baby, you don't have to hurry. Come on and take your time. Born on Monday, met you on Tuesday. In love by Tuesday afternoon. time. Little darling, sunset evening, we believe it. This brand new love between our hearts, and I don't know how to show all the love you've let me know, but it's true, you've given me a brand new start. Oh, baby, you don't have to worry. Come on and clear your mind. Oh, baby, you don't have to hurry. Come on and take your time. Take your time. Take your time. Baby, you don't have to hurry. Come on and take your time. Come on and take your time. It goes so slowly, but we never have enough. But we go so holy. It's love, love, love. Take your time. Take your time. Baby, you don't have to hurry. Come on and take your time. Come on and take your time. Baby, you don't have to hurry. Come on and take your time.
Great.
Very cool. So I have a question. Sort of your pre-chorus. That's an interesting transition because it's not like going to a fourth or a fifth. What is the transition between those two? The baby, you don't have to hurry, and the take your time.
From the pre-chorus to the chorus, you mean?
Yeah.
Down to the relative minor, I would say. I mean, the pre-chorus, it walks up from the verse, which is a G, to G, A, B flat, B into C, and then the pre-chorus is just C, G, C, G, and then take your time is an E minor.
Okay.
But so I guess properly with the vocal line, it would be up a major sixth or down a minor third.
Right. Very cool.
It's not a massive modulation or anything like that. It's
No, yeah.
it's using the same family of chords, just sort of going to a slightly different place.
Yeah, with no C sharps, embarrassingly.
with no sharps, and really that's kind of the key too. Is that when you go into that pre-chorus, it's just you're going to a chord we haven't heard yet in the song.
Yeah.
Even though it's in key. I really like the little clever bits. The way the third line of every verse starts with "and I don't know," but then you hold that the same, and then you switch it again, and the transition to the bridge. It really fooled me the first time I heard it because I thought, okay, here's a repeat of the chorus because you're repeating the same lyric. Come on and take your time, but then you realize, wait a minute, this is like a different section. What are you talking about?
How did I get here?
Get here. This is not my house. And when you're talking about Paul McCartney and his attention to those transitions, I think that level of craft is certainly popping out here.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, really good stuff.
I just didn't. I mean, the irony is, I just don't know anything. That's shown lyrically. Everything is just, I don't know this. I don't know that. I don't know this. I know nothing.
Yeah. And of course, the central conceit of "come on and take your time." That's like a nice play on words. It's maybe not. I don't know how original that is, but
it's not. I mean,
but it's a good little twist.
Thank you. I mean, we used to always joke. I mean, I remember when you're traveling in airports and stuff, hurry up and wait just became ubiquitous every single day. You got to get here right now. And then we're going to wait for a few hours and then something else might happen. That's probably where it came from.
What did you think of the song, Mike?
Well, speaking of I like the hurry up and wait and then the I don't know. So, hurry up and then just wait while I figure things out. But what I liked about the song was the song. It just seemed so, it fit together so nicely, and the bridge was such a nice surprise. Like each turn has that wonderful where it's inevitable but surprising. And, that's really hard to get. And I really liked the journey through the whole song. So rather than a piece of it, in this case, I just like the way the whole thing fit together.
Thank you
This
so
song go
much.
through many revisions, many versions?
No. I mean, really, that's to my detriment sometimes. I'm not big on editing. A thing here or there, I'll pinch it out. But I mean, in terms of getting your true voice out there, for me, it doesn't feel fair to go back and edit. Just because of the way the words come up, and that's not to say anyone else is unfair when they edit. And I've certainly caught my share of flack for not editing, because there are other songs that could use it probably. But just for me, you start to, anytime. It's all about sacrifices and balance, right? And for me, when I say something like, when I sang that line, there was nothing I could sing but take your time. That's one example where I just can't touch that with a pole. There's no way I can edit that. And some songs, and I've moved away from this. I used to be very guilty of this, but you'd kind of get those couple of pockets where like, okay, that's right. And then the rest of the song is, I don't know, whatever. I'm filling space and doing that. But some songs are really, they end up being kind of wall to wall. What's right here? And I just find I've got to stick with it.
And it's true that as you grow as a songwriter, I think you do edit less. Like your first drafts become better.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, you find different songwriters edit for different reasons as well. I love ambiguity and I love dwelling in ambiguity. But a lot of songwriters will tell you that you've got to edit that out. You've got to be very focused about what you're saying. And I've noticed, I've seen a couple of first drafts or revisions that David Bowie made, for example. And he's actually revised in the other direction to take out specificity in favor of ambiguity. And when I saw that, that was an eye-opening moment, because it kind of taught me that, yeah, you can kind of do what you want. You can decide whether you want to be, well, I was sitting on the front porch with the love of my life, that kind of songwriter, or like the sky was blue, the field was green, and everything was where I wanted it to be. That doesn't really mean anything, but it
Kind
can
of does
be just
at the
as
same time.
effective. Exactly.
That's true.
And speaking of doing what we want, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this episode of Song Talk Radio. Special thanks.
Went too fast.
Jay Gordon Wright, you went too fast. And where can our listeners find more about you? You said you were involved in a fundraising.
Yeah, so I'm actually really excited about this. It's a mammoth undertaking, but I'm still excited. It's so we're looking to raise money for the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centres, the OCRCC, and we're releasing 7 episodes over 2021. I've got a bit of a green screen studio here, and I'm doing the instruments all myself. It's COVID safe. I'm 6 feet away from myself at all times. And we're releasing those songs. We'll be talking about an album as well, and doing that. But they can find that yourastar.ca, or just go to my website, jaygordonwright.com, and that'll take you there as well.
Perfect. That sounds exciting.
Wonderful.
That sounds wonderful. And of course, we want to hear from you, our listeners. So please send us your comments on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at SongTalk Radio, or send us an email at feedback@songtalk.ca. And also be sure to check out our YouTube channel for live performance videos and full episodes now that we're all in little virtual boxes. And subscribe today to the SongTalk Radio podcast on your favorite podcast provider, and sign up for a free newsletter at songtalk.ca. You can find links to all the products, books, and web services we mentioned on our resources page on the website. And wherever you are in the world, please join us via Zoom at our next monthly Song Talk meetup. It's free to join on meetup.com and free to attend. Stop by songtalk.ca for the link. You can follow me at neilmodi.com. You can follow Phil.
PhilEmery.ca.
You can follow Mike.
Proudfoot420 on Instagram.
Perfect. And thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to stop by the website at songtalk.ca to browse past shows and find out how you can be a guest. Stay safe, everyone, and keep on writing.
Good night.
Stay safe. Scene.
That's it.
Cutscene.
Right on.
Great stuff.
Yeah, really interesting stuff.
Yeah,
We'll have to
great.
you'll have to come back on so we have more to talk about. I think
I'd love that. Yeah, it went really quickly.
it does.
It always does when we have good guests.
Yeah.
But yeah, your EP was like that was one show and one song. The whole EP is full of great tunes and
Thank you.
not as many leaning as heavily into Beatles. Like Gaslight was kind of Bowie-esque, and there was a lot going on there.
So that one is one that I've not lyrically revised, but that was a song that I totally, just ripped down to the rafters and built it back up again. That one, I've got an earlier version that if you're interested at all, I mean, we could do another show and I could send you the early version and talk about
That would be great,
Actually, both versions, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, because it opened on ukulele and it was kind of laid back and like, you are my link, one connection. And all like lyrically exactly the same, but it was just very laid back. And it wasn't until the right mood, like the song came back to me at the time when I had the right mood for it and realized that like, no, I mean, it's Watch That Man. It's hang on to yourself. It needs just that rip roaring guitar, that energy.
That's a great. Yeah, that'd be really interesting, actually.
Yeah, and I imagine we'll should do a Beatles special, a Beatles show sometime, and have you in there. We'll have like a couple of Beatles experts duking it out.
Well, I've wanted to do a show actually on talking about A Hard Day's Night because it was such a revolutionary piece of cinema when it came out. It changed so many things.
The movie.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to have intruded on the chat earlier. I was just going to say, it was Let It Be that Phil Spector got a hold of.
Let It Be, that's right. Yeah.
And Paul, it was actually cited as one of the reasons why Paul or the Beatles broke up. That Paul, when he officially sued to dissolve the Beatles, he mentioned it as one of the reasons that no, don't you dare do that with my song ever again.
Really?
Because he wanted to go back to, I mean, Let It Be Naked was what McCartney wanted. He wanted to go back to just being a band.
Yeah.
Let's do it. And it was actually mostly John Lennon's bass playing, I think, that made them think, we need to cover this up. Because honestly, like I've played the bass for Long and Winding Road in concert, like in a tribute show, and you got to learn it, but it's awful. And it's actually, I mean, again, you could do an entire episode on pulling apart the isolated tracks and just finding all the mistakes in there, because it's amazing what is in the final version, but you don't hear it. One of my favorites is Sgt. Pepper's Reprise, when it's starting up and just the percussion and stuff.
Yeah.
They're talking to each other on the mic, and you say like, shag it. What? Twist. And then they go in, and at the end they hold band, and then afterwards George is on mic, and it's in the final going band, bandy, bandy, band. Cool, yeah. George Harrison playing violin on All You Need Is Love, and that is in the final, even though he cannot stay on pitch to save his life. It's just amazing what's in there. And today it's all about perfection and getting rid of that. And I think that's some of the joy we've lost.
Which is why I always hate, like when I played my band in bands, I've always said, we're not playing to a click.
Oh, here he goes.
That's right. Because, well, we never played with a click. So why would you go into the studio to try to
Look what you started.
to get the energy of being live and then do something that you never do live? It doesn't make any sense.
It does, because if you need to punch in, and as I understand it, that's one of the only reasons is if you you really effed up that C chord in the pre-chorus. Oh, just take another C chord, and then using a click is beneficial. But if you actually want to learn the song that you're trying to release to dozens of people.
Well, they punched in for many years without
Dozens.
clicks, so I think they were able to do it.
You can still punch in, but frankly, I mean, I've been going through this, I'm grappling with this in my mind for a while now, and I don't know. I think I've come to the conclusion that click is better, and it does not rob the life out of a song, because the groove of a song, the feeling of a song lies in between the beats. It's not that your tempo is consistent. That doesn't rob you of the life of the song.
Right.
It's if you play incredibly rigidly, but if you play to a steady tempo with a cool groove and breath and life and all that sort of stuff, then it still works.
And that's so true. I mean, even if you're playing to a click, I always find that drums have to be the first thing you put down. Because if everyone's playing to the click and then the drummer's sitting behind, or it's nothing the drummer's doing wrong, but if everything's rigidly set up to fall right on the beat, they're not paying attention to the drummer's feel. So I always do the drums first, because if I'm, early or late on this beat or that beat, I've got to catch it. If the feel is behind the beat, then I've got to play everything else behind the beat as well.
Yes,
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
many ways.
Oh
to
yeah,
make
we
good
definitely have to have you back, because I wanted to ask, because you started out playing violin, and I'm really curious how that informs a modern songwriter. If you start out playing classical violin, then you end up making modern pop music. Because most people come from a piano background or a guitar background, right?
Yeah,
Or
and
a lot of jazz players come from trumpet backgrounds, but we don't talk to them.
I don't know if it helps me or hinders me. I think one of the things in modern music is the receding of texture as a musical tool. If there is counterpoint or polyphony or anything like that, it's single instruments. Everything's clean. And certainly as synth sounds come into fashion, it's, even an acoustic guitar can take up too much sonic room. So I don't know if it's helped me. It's certainly pointed me in a certain direction. I mean, a lot of my stuff is just irrevocably in the Beatles, ELO, Bowie wheelhouse, and there's no getting it out of there.
chorus guitars.
Yeah, exactly. Let's record it, but do it 9 times and put 3 left, 3 right, 3 center. You start to sound like the guy from Princess Bride, But no, it is what it is. I mean, for better or worse, it's funny, Phil, you mentioned Beatles as Bach, and I've kind of always thought of them as Mozart, just the obsession with melody and form. And then, in their late Beatles, you get into kind of the late 19th, early 20th century Russian melody. But no, exactly. I mean, growing up with that, because I started violin when I was 8, and I was playing in a youth orchestra. And so, I mean, I want to say 10, 11 years old and playing Haydn symphonies and second violin as well, which is interesting because you learn the inner harmonies, and you learn to sit and rest, and you learn that the melody's over there and I'm over here. And that's something that doesn't happen a lot when you're starting on guitar or piano, because you're the center of the universe when you're sitting at the piano.
So you get a bit of perspective on melody and structure and harmony.
Yeah. So, I mean, Take Your Time is actually one of the least textured songs I've done, especially in terms of vocals. I had on the EP, the Kyrie Eleison that led off, and got to work with some really fantastic singers to pull that together. But I remember I had a demo of it and played it for Ian Thomas, and he said, I hope I'm not getting him in trouble by saying this, but he said, yeah, I remember back at the beginning of my career doing the multiple voice thing, but I mean, Jeremy, come on, it's sounding like Monty Python in here. And so, and now, admittedly,
a compliment.
Well, spam. No, I mean, admittedly, the demo was me singing all four. So I admit, me singing the soprano on top. But how else am I going to rig this up for the singers to hear it? So, no, I mean, the vocal texturing that I do, I'm being forced to kind of move away from it because it's just not in vogue these days.
But it might come back.
It might come back.
I'll
be kicking myself.
We had a guest last week, and she was actually sounded like Led Zeppelin.
I heard her, yeah.
And it was so nice to actually hear something with some energy, It's like all these kids doing all this happy music. It's,
But this is the thing, too, is that I was listening to her and I was struck because it fit right in with today's mold, so to speak, in a really grand sense, not to, deprecate what she's doing. But what I find so charming these days is that you get this really heavy music. And even, to a certain extent, it's the same with me. You listen to Gaslight, and there's so much anger in that song. And then, here I am, polite. And, I'm not dropping any of my G's. I'm sitting here in my home office, ready to talk about counterpoint, and it's just so. It's so mild-mannered and sterile and antithetical. It's like you talked about the Beatles being teddy boys, and that's not for me. That's not me. I'm not that guy. But at the same time, if we're going to have this music, can we have someone kicking bottles off the table? Can we actually have someone who just doesn't give a flying toss? Because it doesn't.
Talk about Bowie too. There's always that massive disparity, especially with him. There's the guy on stage is clearly not the guy who's at home.
No, totally. And there's one thing that's always struck me. This is an exception because it is really pleasant to be here, and you guys definitely know what you're talking about. But the majority of interviews, one of the things that made the Beatles and Bowie so charming is the fact that they didn't suffer idiots. And when you look at some of the people who were interviewing them who had no idea what they were doing, and they told them off. They were aloof. I'm not giving you this interview. It was like Billy Bob Thornton every day of the week with them. And that was part of their charm. That's why people liked it. But now, if you're a musician these days, you kind of got to hold your hat in your hand and go from door to door to this paper and this paper and this blog and this blog. And oh, please, won't you talk to me? And they'll
be on my best behavior.
Yeah, and they'll say your name wrong, and you're like, "That's my name now. I can do this. I can be a Frank." I want to get back to that. I want to get back because I'm a pretty aloof person by nature. And again, you three are songwriters. You get it. We're guys hanging around and chatting about this, but. Man, so much has to change to get the energy back into the music and the scene.